Scooterboard project.
That's right.
I'm here with Peter Stevens, the designer of, how would you describe it?
In this case, it's a step beyond a normal skateboard in that it's got handlebars not for steering, but to give it an extra degree of manoeuvrability.
And so what first interested you in this scooterboard?
Well, I got an email from Michael Rowan, who I didn't know at all, just say, are you still interested in freelance work? Yeah. So as a designer, I said, yeah, absolutely. And he described to me his idea for this board and wondered if I would be interested in designing it. The fascinating bit was that I said yes, because back in the 60s, when I was a student at Royal College of Art, a friend of mine at the end of the first year, we all went and did adventurous things around the world. He went to America and he came back with some things that he called trucks, which were the axles and wheels of something called a skateboard that we knew nothing of. And so when we started our second year, we thought, well, we'd make these skateboards because he kind of described what he'd seen, and we'd learn to ride them. And because we didn't have a clue what we were doing, and we learned in Hyde Park where the paths of gravel. So we had fairly damaged elbows until we realised that some cricket guards and things you could put in your elbows and knees. So we sort of learned to do it. So I liked the idea of the project because it was kind of the first actual thing I designed and made.
That was Peter Stevens at a 731 against a 1078.
Although you already had an interest in American culture, American popular culture, didn't you?
Yeah, because I was fascinated, partly because I discovered in a magazine shop, an American magazine called Hot Rod, and I was just captivated. What can this be? And it was about hot rods and custom cars and land speed record on the Bonneville salt flats and all that kind of culture. And I suppose at the time, because very quickly myself and some friends, we actually had crew cuts, which, in the Beatles days, it was long hair that one would have instead. Our cultural connections were somewhat confused because we also liked duffel coats, and we liked the kind of books like On the Road by Jack Kerouac. So there was a fascinating thing for America, but we didn't know enough about it. So Hot Rod magazine introduced me to it, and then when my friend came back from America, and there was a new bit of culture that we knew nothing about, which was skateboards.
And after that interest in American culture, you went on to design sports and racing cars. How did that come about?
Yeah, it's funny that because in my mind, I was a kind of blue collar product. In other words, I like to do products which everybody could share in, really, and I had this vision of doing a very simple car for the people and that sort of right on business. But because almost immediately I was asked to design cars for a chap called Tom Walkinshaw, and we did special versions of Mazdas, and then I worked at Lotus and eventually at McLaren, all the time really designing cars that I would never be able to afford. So I still had this blue collar idea, and I remember at a lecture I gave, somebody piped up from the back and said, why don't you design cars that ordinary people can have? And I said, well, nobody's asked me to. And it wasn't until I did some work in India with Mahindra that I did a little thing called a rural utility vehicle, which was a sensible, and it was good fun because it was making a tiny little sort of truck that a village could buy between them and share, and it could be made into a little bus which would take 6 ladies to market or something. So I always had that in mind, but it's just people would come along with these expensive things for me to do.
And you're still designing today?
I am, and people say, "Well, haven't you retired?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what retirement would look like, but I think I wouldn't like it." You know, partly because, and it's probably slightly unfair, designers can divide into two groups. One of the groups being those who like being a designer, and they like being at the front of the stand at the motor show introducing the new car. And there are some people who like designing, which doesn't require you to stand up at a motor show and face the press. And I just like putting the marks on paper, really, which is why this, Byron Bay project starts with putting marks on paper, and Michael liked what he saw, and even though it was purely via internet, we got on very well, and we realized we shared a lot of ideas for how it should be, hence the new product.
And so you're working on a democratized product at last then?
Well, this is true, yes, and I'm hoping I'll get one too, and I'll have to remind myself, But this is quite neat because to really maneuver a skateboard effectively, you need to be fairly dramatic with your body movements, because it steers because you lean it tight to one side or the other. When you've got the handlebars, that you can actually lean it more because you're more stable on the board. You can do it with the handlebars. So yeah, maybe old chaps can still do that. We'll see.